By the end of this video, you're going to know everything you need to know for a first-time visit to beautiful Salzburg, Austria, with plenty of tips on how to save money, avoid crowds, and just overall have the best time ever. Now, in case you're new here, hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com. And this channel is all about practical travel tips from someone who's been there, done that, so be sure to like and subscribe if that sounds like your kind of thing. Now, let's start with some travel planning tips for Salzburg. First off, a lot of people treat Salzburg as a day trip destination, but I would recommend staying here for a night or two if you can. Honestly, there's a lot to see beyond just the main highlights, and I think that staying here overnight really allows you to enjoy the city a little bit more and kind of tap into some of those hidden gems that you just wouldn't get on just a day tour. In terms of when to visit, I'm a huge advocate for off-season visits to Salzburg just because during the summer, when it's hot and there's crowds, it just kind of takes away from the magic of it. Though I will say there isn't really such thing as a complete off-season for Salzburg just because it is a pretty busy destination year-round. It's extremely popular, so even if you come in the middle of winter or you come in January, February, don't be surprised if there's still tons of people. That said, even though summer does give you the best chance at good weather, to me, the beauty of Salzburg really is in the cultural heritage, the historic center, and the mountainous landscapes all around. So really, you don't necessarily need the most amazing weather. It's not like it's a beach or anything. So I do think visiting here during the off-season is actually a pretty good idea. Crowds-wise, January and February will probably give you the least amount of crowds, although the weather is quite questionable. The other thing I will say is if you come between mid-November until Christmas, of course, a secondary peak season for Salzburg is the Christmas market season. And Christmas markets here are a pretty big deal. You can expect quite heavy crowds to be here during that time, but as someone who's been to their Christmas markets, I can safely say it is 100% worth it. These Christmas markets are absolutely beautiful and well worth braving the crowds for. There are some other big events to have on your radar as well. As I mentioned before, Salzburg is a culture-heavy city and really proud of their musical heritage as well as the birthplace of Mozart and all that. So there are certain music festivals throughout the year that make the city incredibly busy as well. So some dates to have on your radar include the Salzburg Festival, which happens in July and August, and the Mozart Festival in late January. Now, regarding where to stay, Salzburg is a pretty compact city, so you don't necessarily need to stay in the very historic center to be close to the sites. But I will say that the Salzburg that you imagine, that you see in all the photos, that you see in all the postcards, that is largely concentrated in the old town, and the modern parts of Salzburg are definitely less photogenic and not as nice. So if you want to optimize the magic points of your visit, definitely try to stay at a hotel in or very close to the Altstadt. But if you want to save money, anywhere in this general vicinity will have you very, very close to the sites. I will say though, if you are staying the night, I did notice that Salzburg as a city does have something that I haven't noticed in a lot of other places, which are hotel and Salzburg card packages. So you can book a hotel and also a sightseeing card at the same time, which can help you get a better deal on both of those things. Finally, I do want to say, if you have more time, do try to see more of Austria beyond just Salzburg. Honestly, there are so many great destinations in Austria, and the public transport really connects most of the country, so there are so many different opportunities for you to explore beyond just Salzburg if you wanted to. Within 2.5 hours on the train, for instance, you can visit cities like Innsbruck or Vienna. Hallstatt is also wonderful, but I'd advise against just doing a day there because that's what everyone does, and if you want to really appreciate the beauty of it, staying one night can make all the difference. And honestly, even better than the cities is the incredible nature all around. Salzburg is well known as the gateway to the Salzkammergut region, so there's loads of mountains, loads of beautiful lakes like Wolfgangsee and Mondsee, and really there's just so much for you to see and do. Now let's move on to some Salzburg travel tips and tips for getting around. Salzburg Airport is actually located super close to the Old Town, about 10 kilometers away, so there's a lot of really easy options for getting into the Old Town from the airport. The cheapest is definitely the bus. It's about €3 one way, and there's two main options, the number 2 bus, which takes just over 20 minutes, and the number 10 bus, which takes about 15 minutes. Both are really frequent though, and you can get tickets either on board, at one of the machines at the bus stop, or through the Salzburg mobile app. You can of course also take a taxi, which takes about 15 minutes. The cost is between 20 to €25, which is quite steep for the distance, but honestly, if you're just looking for ease and convenience, it's not a bad option. Now, if you're arriving by train, I will say the Salzburg Central Station, the Hauptbahnhof, is actually only 20 minutes away, 25 minutes on foot from the Old Town. But to be honest, it's not the nicest walk. So if you're trying to get to the Old Town, taking the bus might be a good option, but you can walk, just know that it's not going to be magical straight away. Now, to be honest, Salzburg is a very small city. and very compact, so once you get to the center, the best way to get around is on foot, especially because a lot of the Altstadt is actually pedestrianized. And unless you're planning to do some very remote naturey day trips outside, you definitely won't need to rent a car for your time in the city itself. And even if you are doing excursions outside of the city, again, public transport is really excellent, so you don't necessarily need a car to be able to enjoy a lot of the naturey spots. So definitely do some research before you commit to renting a car, because honestly, the public transport is very, very good here, and it's well worth experiencing as well. Now, let's move on to some Salzburg tips for attractions. First tip, do make sure you're doing the big attractions early in the morning. The main hotspots in the city, like Mirabell Palace and Gardens, and around the Old Town, like at Mozart Geburtshaus, those tend to be the first points of call for any day tours that are arriving in the city. So usually by 10 a.m., they're going to be flooded with people and will continue to be flooded with people up until 5 p.m. when a lot of the tours leave the city. So if you're doing any of these big ones, I would definitely recommend doing them early in the morning and then saving the afternoon for some of the lesser known attractions, and especially for entering museums and going inside the attractions, because most of the time day tours don't actually have the time to go inside. So relative to the crowds outside of the attractions, you'll find that the museums themselves can actually be quite empty. Now, before we dive into the paid attractions, I will say Salzburg does have quite a few free attractions that I feel like a lot of first-timers miss. So I'm just going to outline some of those now to make sure you don't miss them as well. The first one is the view from the Museum der Moderne Münchberg, which is amazing. You can take an elevator up, which costs a few euro, or if you're up for a bit of a hike, you can just walk up a bunch of stairs. It's a bit of a sweaty one, but the views are absolutely worth it. Up there, they also have a really nice restaurant and bar called the M32. So if you want a very scenic place for a drink, especially in the summer, it is gorgeous and really worth checking out. The museum itself is also pretty cool if you're into modern art. The St. Peter's Monastery and Cemetery is also really beautiful and peaceful. And okay, maybe it's not worth going out of your way to see, but the giant pickle statues in Furtwängler Park are also really fun. And if you're open to venturing a little farther away from the central core of the city, there's a really cool spot right next to the airport known as Hangar 7. Here you'll find a collection of historic airplanes, Formula One cars, and helicopters from the founder of Red Bull, a company that actually has its headquarters really close by. Now onto paid attractions. In terms of saving money on sightseeing, one thing I will say is that the Salzburg card here is really, really worth it. I got one of these on my most recent trip and basically just ticked off all the other attractions I hadn't seen yet in Salzburg, and I saved a ton of money doing it. This is probably one of the best value city cards I've encountered in my travels, and it only costs about 31 euro in peak season for 24 hours. So if you just visit a handful of attractions, you'll actually get that value back, and I do think it's really worth it if you're planning on going to any of the paid sites during your time in Salzburg. Now, in terms of what is definitely worth it, I do think the Hohensalzburg Fortress is really worth seeing. It's an absolutely beautiful fortress, amazing views, and lots to do and see once you're up there as well. Another excellent value attraction, in my opinion, is the Domquartier. So this is a surprisingly large complex that's located right in the middle of the city, with several interesting parts like various grand rooms, museums, and galleries. Plus, you get a really unique view from the terrace, and you also get a fun view overlooking the cathedral from the organ gallery as well. If you're in this area, going to the noontime organ concert at the Salzburg Cathedral is honestly really worth it as well. It's a super special experience. You get to hear them play different songs on the many organs that are in the cathedral, and some of these are organs that Mozart himself played on back in the day. So definitely a very unique and historic experience that's worth the price tag. Now, in terms of which paid attractions I don't personally think are worth it unless you have a super vested interest in the topic, the first one is the Mozart's Geburtshaus, so the Mozart birth house, which is of course the building where Mozart was born. This is usually the first point of interest for any visitor that's visiting Salzburg for the first time. It's bright yellow, it's in the Old Town, you really can't miss it, and I think that for historical value, seeing it from the outside, definitely worth doing, but once you're inside, honestly, the museum itself isn't super spectacular. The rooms are quite plain. They're kind of made up to look as they would have done back in the day. There's a lot of paintings and information about Mozart's family, so not really about him. And overall, I just wasn't super blown away by the experience, especially because it gets really crowded and the displays themselves aren't that cohesive or super impressive. So that's just my personal opinion. I don't necessarily think it's worth the price to go see it on the inside. Another one I don't necessarily think you have to do is the Salzburg Christmas Museum. So this is, of course, a museum dedicated to Christmas, but it honestly is very small. There's only a handful of small rooms, and you kind of just look at old ornaments and kind of these small displays about Christmas. So unless you're like a major Christmas enthusiast, I don't necessarily think it's the best use of money. Now, in terms of avoiding crowds, a general tip I have is to maybe potentially visit these paid attractions right before they close, because a lot of the time people will go first thing in the morning, it'll get busy in the afternoon, but by the late afternoon, right before it closes, the crowds will filter out. In terms of Sound of Music locations, which I know is a major draw for a lot of overseas tourists, there are quite a few cool locations that you can visit right in the Salzburg Old Town. For instance, there's the Mirabel Gardens, which is where Maria and the children frolic while they sing Do Re Mi. There's Residenzplatz, which has the fountain where Julie Andrews kind of splashes around during I Have Confidence. And of course, Nonnberg Abbey, which is the abbey where you see Maria at the beginning of the movie. To be honest though, if you want the full Sound of Music experience, and a big part of the reason you're visiting is because of Sound of Music, then I would definitely recommend booking a Sound of Music tour. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but these tours do exist, and I think they're excellent value for Sound of Music fans, just because a lot of the most iconic locations outside of the city are actually quite spread apart, and so it's not super easy for you to organize your own DIY tour to all these places unless you have a car. So places like the Villa von Trapp, and the 16 going on 17 gazebo, places like that are kind of hard to reach solely with public transport. So booking a tour is cheesy, but I think it's well worth doing if you're a big Sound of Music fan. And I'll link some options for you in the description. Now, I know this is a lot of information, but if you're still with me and you're a Sound of Music fan, let me know in the comments by commenting Do Re Mi. Now, last thing in terms of attractions, as I said before, Salzburg is very proud of its musical heritage. So if you want to book a concert at some point, there's actually a lot of different options for doing just that. I've heard really good things about the concerts at Mirabel Palace, which is a super stunning venue. And if you want a free concert experience, the Mozarteum University actually has special student concerts, and it's completely free of charge, so also worth looking into. I'll link the details down in the description. Now let's move on to some Salzburg food and drink tips. When you're in Salzburg, there's a lot of great food to enjoy. Of course, there's the most typical Austrian dishes like schnitzel, which is a thin slab of fried meat, and Tafelspitz, which is boiled beef in broth. But I'd also recommend trying different specialties that are unique to this specific region. I will say though, if you have schnitzel, they don't really eat it with noodles here, unfortunately. So some regional specialties that I can highly endorse include Käsknochen, which are amazing small dumplings served with cheese and caramelized onion, typically prepared in a cast iron pan. Pinzgauer Käsknochen in particular is really popular, and that's made with local cheese from the Pinzgau region. There's also the Salzburger Nockerl. I don't think I'm saying that right, but yeah, it's this dessert and it's very, very famous, and it's basically a souffle-like dessert that is shaped to resemble the surrounding mountain peaks. And there's of course also the ubiquitous Salzburger Mozartkugel, which is sold in pretty much every souvenir shop, consisting of marzipan and pistachio, wrapped in nougat and dipped in chocolate. There are loads of different brands that make them now, but the original ones are said to come from Fürst, who wrap theirs in a silver foil with a blue Mozart portrait. And for a unique local street food, one really popular one to try is known as the Bosna, which dates back to 1949 and is a sandwich consisting of 2 thin sausages served with raw onions, curry powder, and usually mustard. Another thing is I definitely recommend you check out the oldest bakery in the city, which is the Stiftsbäckerei St. Peter. This bakery is almost 1,000 years old. And if you go in the morning, the whole courtyard that it's based in smells like bread, and it's heavenly. So basically you head into this little cellar where there's a handful of things to choose from, either sourdough or brioche bread. They just do the receipts through a tally, and it's just a super charming experience, and the bread is also very tasty. And in terms of drinks, one of my favorite personal finds on my most recent trip was the awesome Augustiner Bräustübel Mölln, which is this massive Austrian beer tavern. Actually, I think it's the largest one in the entire country. And it's home to 8 beautiful rooms and halls, where they're serving beer that's been brewed there for over 400 years. And this beer is freshly poured from wooden barrels into proper stoneware. So overall, just a really unique experience and probably one of my favorite places in the city. They also have a little food court sort of area where you can get little snacks and nibbles as well, but it is mostly a drinking place, so I wouldn't necessarily come here for dinner, maybe after dinner, or if you're fine with a bit of a liquid diet. Now here's some final Salzburg tips to know when you arrive. The first is to bring some cash. Most places will take card these days, but honestly, Austria can still sometimes be a little old-fashioned, so there are certain instances, like with smaller purchases or smaller places, where they'll still prefer cash. Especially coins, because in certain situations you might need to be paying for a bathroom or tipping a bathroom attendant. So definitely keep that in mind, that public bathrooms in Salzburg are not free. They usually cost about 50 cents, sometimes €1. In terms of tipping, rounding up or doing about 10% tends to be the most common, But do be aware that the way they tip in Austria can be quite different from what you're used to in North America. So you wouldn't typically leave cash on the table or anything like that. Usually what you do is when you get the final bill, you tell them exactly how much you want to pay, including tips. So let's say your bill was 45 euro, you want to round up to 50. You give them the bill, you say 50, and then they'll know to give you the change accordingly. And this is the same even if you pay with card. Just before they hand over the card machine, you'd say, okay, 50, and then they'll know to input 50 in the machine. Now, as a final tip, do not be offended or sad if locals don't care that much about the Sound of Music. I personally grew up watching it every Christmas, so it's a very special movie to me, but most Austrians don't care about it, probably haven't seen it, and so probably wouldn't know where the filming locations are if you were to just pull them over randomly on the street. So just know the Sound of Music may be a big deal where you're from, not so much in Austria unless you're selling a tour for it. All right, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more travel videos just like this one, and I'll see you next time. Bye.